is not the time to be silent, right? Right? So wherever we are, if we are imagining, we can always climb to a different situation. We can always grow, we can always lift. My people, we can always rise. So I want you to say that word. Can y'all do that? Say rise. 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 Say it with me. Rise. Together we rise. Together we rise. Together we rise. Together we rise.
Hello and welcome to the Green Radio Hour with John Bowermaster here on WKNY, Radio Kingston, 1490 on your AM dial, 107.9 FM, streaming live and archived always at radiokingston.org. Something a bit different today, something about the ocean, specifically about the Outlaw Ocean, but mostly it's going to be an hour of talk combined with music. A few months ago, I had as a guest the New York Times reporter Ian Urbina, who, after many years of reporting on ocean issues around the world, including lots of bad stuff about slavery and piracy, illegal fishing, and general lawlessness, had published a book, The Outlaw Ocean. At the time, we talked about his continued efforts to report on ocean issues, which included a coming feature film starring Leo DiCaprio, a handful of documentaries for Netflix and others, and more magazine reporting. He didn't mention at the time music publishing. Next I hear from Ian, he's established essentially a recording label, Synesthesia Media, featuring dozens of songs by musicians. Next I hear from Ian, he's established essentially a recording label, Synesthesia Media, featuring dozens of songs by musicians from literally around the globe who have written and recorded hundreds of songs inspired by his reporting. Here's how he put the inspiration in an email. Says Ian, I've spent the past several years reporting on lawlessness at sea across 5 oceans, 14 countries, and all 7 continents. In 2019, my book, The Outlaw Ocean, came out based on my series for the New York Times. I have subsequently launched various initiatives and projects related to it, which are primarily focused on spreading the awareness about the environmental, labor, and human rights abuses occurring at sea. The Outlaw Ocean Music Project is a first-of-its-kind collaboration of such creators. In combining their mediums, these narrators have conveyed emotion and a sense of place in an enthralling new way. The result is a captivating body of music based on the Outlaw Ocean reporting. All of that time spent at sea allowed me to build an audio library of field recordings. It featured a variety of textured and rhythmic sounds like machine gun fire off the coast of Somalia and chanting captive deckhands on the South China Sea. Using the sound archive and inspired by the reporting, over 300 artists from more than 60 countries are producing EPs in their own interpretive musical styles, be it electronic, ambient, classical, or hip-hop. Many artists also use the reported footage to make their own videos tied to their songs. It's hardly surprising to me, says Ian, that a music project was born from this book, since I used music in various and sometimes oddball ways while reporting offshore. Certain songs were my version of Adderall, helping me focus in distracting conditions. Others offered an incredible salve for deeply dark things witnessed. But perhaps my most valuable use of music while reporting was when songs served for me as mnemonic devices. Before we hear from Ian about this project, let's hear one of the songs by De Osos. Here's how Ian describes this song. This track really resonated with me because the tone of the music is so haunting, sad, and otherworldly, quite akin to the topic of sea slavery, a term that I use to refer to forced labor that you can find on tens of thousands of long-haul fishing boats. About 2 minutes into this track, De Osos masterfully used a speech that Secretary of State John Kerry gave at an event in 2015 in Chile, in which he recounted the story from the Outlaw Ocean about a man who was trafficked and held captive on a fishing boat, shackled by the neck, fishing on the South China Sea. I found the use of Secretary Kerry's speech deeply moving.
if you get a chance, go Google this New York Times article a couple of weeks ago about illegal fishing. It was a front page story, a very dramatic story. It told the story of a young Cambodian boy, who was lured as a refugee, essentially. He was looking for construction work. And they told him that he would be connected to people who were going to put him in the construction business so he could earn a living and have a better life. The minute he got across the border, they basically imprisoned him, and they took him to the captain of a boat. I assume he was sold to the captain of the boat, and he became a prisoner on the boat to go fishing. And for 2 years, he was at sea, and when other boats were around, so that he couldn't escape, the captain would shackle him around his neck and chain him to the boat. This was his life for several years, till he finally did escape.
The song from the Outlaw Ocean collection is called Silence is the Core of the Lifestyle at Sea. Let's hook up with Ian now. I'm kind of blown away by the enormity of the project, the music project. You're talking 250 artists from 50 countries. Did I read that right?
It's actually doubled since then. So at present, at least as of, we're signing new artists every week, and last week's report was we're at 420 and 93 million listenership in 83 countries. So yeah, it's growing to just massive proportions.
And when you say we, who is actually searching out the artists, or how are the artists finding you?
So I created a company called Synesthesia Media specifically to oversee this project and, maybe even delve into other crossover type projects, talking with game makers. One of the things I wanted to do when I left the Times was do more experimentation and taking journalism into other mediums. So the music project was the first example, and then we're looking at possibly making a game out of the Outlaw Ocean book, and then we also are working with animators to sort of make artful renderings of key stories. And we have a story coming up with NBC News where we hired a South Korean artist animator to make a mini animated video of it. So these are all the sorts of crossover plays that I hope Synesthesia would do. And so Synesthesia is the label and also the company that oversees the project, and it's got a staff of 4 people.
All right. But do you consider yourself a musician yourself?
Say that again. Do
you consider yourself a musician?
No, I am just woefully untalented at any instrument, but I'm an avid and omnivorous consumer of music. So that is what got me interested in it. And but yeah, none of us are musicians ourselves.
Yeah, and this notion of melding music and journalism, when did that come to you? One day while you were afloat in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, or?
It's kind of like a child of 5 parents, if you will, in that it has multiple origin stories, and I'm not sure, to be honest, which is the one that is the strongest. But one element of this thought began in driving around my then 6-7-year-old son and his friends, and a game we used to play called the Imagination Game, where I would play dramatic instrumental style music, often Hans Zimmer or Max Richter, these great composers who score a lot of major films, and I would play them, or electronic stuff, but I'd play them something that's really dramatic, and I'd play them up to the jump, the first 15 seconds or so, and then I'd turn the volume off and I'd say, okay, describe to me the scene. in your head that you use, that you populated that sound with. And it was this really fun, interesting left brain kind of exercise, almost like a writing exercise without words and or without writing. And that got me thinking about the way that you can move between mediums, from music to words to, and narrative, and then back again. And then, that was sort of ongoing kind of curiosity I had. And then while I was reporting, I often would use as a reporting device music. If there was some, if I was on a ship and something had, intense had gone down, and I was trying at the end of the day to capture it in my notebook so I didn't forget it when I got back to my desk a month later, I would often rely on music to almost as a mnemonic device capture the feeling of the moment. And I would sort of choose a song that really felt like it rendered the vibe between somber and stressed, or violent, or scary, and that also got me thinking, that's really interesting that you can use music, or that I have found myself using music almost in this Pavlovian way. Because then when I would loop back 2 months later to write the story, I'd look at the notes and I'd play the song, and it would bring back feelings that I couldn't have put in words. So all these sorts of, that's just two examples of things that got me thinking that it would be really cool to take the reporting, both the words and the storylines and the characters and the tensions and emotions, but also the very sounds from the reporting, and team up with musicians to see if they could do something dazzling with it all.
Yeah, and the end result is you found a variety of artists, musical artists, from hip hop to EDM, etc., but also mixed in your own samplings from your own field recordings, right?
Yeah, and the musicians have sort of have two relationships with the reporting. One, if you will, is a top-down relationship where they read the book and they choose what elements within the reporting speaks to them. And maybe it's sea slavery, or maybe it's ocean plastic, or illegal whaling, or arms trafficking, or murder, or the heroism of these vigilante conservationists. Whatever it is that speaks to them, sort of emotionally and intellectually and politically, is the top-down relationship with the reporting. And they start thinking about a song in their head that will capture that chapter or that event or that scene. And then the bottom-up relationship is, we spent a good 6-7 months, we being synesthesia and staff, going through 5 years of footage and stripping out interesting sounds that are either ambient or prose. The ambient sounds are textured, often rhythmic sounds like machine gun fire in Somalia, or chanting Cambodian deckhands on the South China Sea on the one hand, or they're prose like Secretary of State John Kerry giving a talk at the UN about sea slavery, and Lang Long, a character that we reported on, or Ghost Fleet, a movie that well, and sort of like where key figures are talking about these issues that are discussed in the book, as well as interviews. The Prose Archive has interviews with Tanzanian stowaways, and just really interesting sounds. And that collection of ingredients, if you will, almost sample seasonings, are sort of put at the disposal of the chef that is the musician, and we say, hey, look, you run this kitchen, you make what you want, but we'd like you, if possible, to connect to the reporting in this top-down and bottom-up way.
And had you seen or heard any kind of project like this that combined journalism and music?
I haven't. I mean, it feels a little self-aggrandizing to say that. It could be more testament to my my lack of exposure to what's out there. But no, I haven't come across anything like this. I mean, except Hamilton, and that's actually, Lin-Manuel Miranda was a real inspiration to me, in the sense that I'm a big fan and long consumer and devotee of hip hop. And at the front end of this, the thought was, and I'm blanking on the name of the academic, but Lin-Manuel Chernoff.
Ron Chernow's book about Hamilton.
Yeah, and what I thought like was beautiful and brilliant about that project was, number one, what it did for hip hop in raising it and showing its potential to do things that hadn't been done before, and number two, the teaming up of a die-in-the-hole textbook academic historian and this opus of his, and sort of bringing in this rigorous, nuanced, historically accurate way into this music form, and that was one of the things that I was really inspired by. And initially, I was thinking of doing a hip hop rendering of the Outlaw Ocean.
That's great.
As this project, and sort of taking the book and teaming up with rappers. But the economics of recruiting big name rappers was, I just didn't have the money. Just put it bluntly, it was just going to be too expensive to do that. So that's why I started heading towards, classical solo pianists and electronic artists instead, because it could be done more cost efficiently.
And the artists that you ended up kind of collaborating with, were you familiar with some of them, a few of them, none of them?
Yeah, so on the front end, in the very beginning, I just went through I have this obscene Spotify lists that are all over the map in terms of genre, and I just sort of thought, hey, this is a cool, weird chance to actually interact with these people whose art I've consumed for so long, and that's another thing that would be fun in the project. So I just started reaching out to folks that I liked, and whose music I respected, and then word started getting out, and people started coming out of the woodwork toward us and asking, they'd heard about it, and then we also just started branching out more generally. Spotify and Pandora and some others sort of got in touch and said, this is really neat. We'd love to support what you're doing. Wouldn't it be smart if you diversified your genres, and got into jazz and classical, and we thought, yeah, that would be smart. So we sort of took that counsel and began building out there. And once we got as big as we got, I started entering the realm of artists that I'd never heard of. And to be honest, whether I like the music or have consumed it before was somewhat beside the point. My ambition here was to try this experiment, make it global and non-exclusive, sort of almost a creative flash mob, if you will, and also sort of conscript these musicians in all these different countries around the world into the service of almost as cultural diplomats of messaging about the very concerns, John, that you know well, the human rights and labor and environmental abuses occurring offshore. This was a creative way to get those people, these musicians, to get some level of fluency in these issues, and then, because by golly they put out an album on it, they better know something about it, then to potentially talk about it on their platform.
Let's listen to another track off of the Outlaw Ocean soundtrack. This is by Bollier. The song is called Crew. Writes Ian, about 100 miles off the coast of Thailand, 36 Cambodian boys and men worked barefoot all day and into the night on the deck of a purse seiner fishing ship. 15-foot swells climbed the sides of the ship, clipping the crew below the knees. Ocean spray and fish innards made the floor skating rink slippery. Seesawing erratically from the rough seas and gale winds, the deck was an obstacle course of jagged tackle, spinning winches, and tall stacks of 500-pound nets. To pull that weight with their bare hands, the crew on this ship chanted to ensure synchronicity, like some water-bound chain gang. Fishing boats on the South China Sea, especially in the Thai fleet, had for years been notorious for using so-called sea slaves, mostly migrants forced offshore by debt or duress. The chanting described in this excerpt from the book encapsulates all that is both dark and inspiring about this place. The will of these boys to survive and their work ethic and camaraderie on the one hand, as well as the Dickensian nature of their work and the brutality of their living conditions. That same chanting is what Bollier uses in the song Crew. I asked him to tell me why he used this sound from the field recordings. I kind of wanted that sonar to be the backbone to the track, he said, and I constructed the rest of the track around that, using some of those captain voice recordings. So it's a track pretty much driving forward by the beep. When I heard the voices of those Cambodian boys, I knew that would be the backbone of the track, and I tried to make the beat and the rhythm to the track be that kind of rhythm that you can hear working, if that makes sense. So it's not like a very smooth rhythm going forward, but more like that you can physically feel, the rhythm being pulled forward the way those Cambodian boys would pull those nets in. For me, that really was like a translation of the physical work those boys do to the music. Yeah, well, I like the analogy of the music being like a soundtrack to the book, which is when you take a step back is what it becomes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the best metaphor around in some senses. The one sort of qualifier I always put on that is once we are far along with an artist and they're actually about to start cooking, if you will, the chef metaphor, I often hasten to tell them, okay, don't think of this too literally.
Yeah, don't be
and
literal.
rigidly
Right.
Yeah, I don't want you to score a scene in the book. I want you to interpret emotionally the things that you feel in the book and the voices and tell stories, but make great music. Don't make this a concept.
And when thinking about it as a play, have you done any public performances of it with the kind of readings and music and film or some and anything else?
We haven't. I mean, initially we were going to do something in Aspen Ideas, and also possibly sort of a tour. Maybe choose some, big cities abroad where we have a good core of participating artists, and do an event of some sort where we play the music. But then COVID happened, and we realized we've got to stay online for the time being.
Yeah. And, you talk about contrasts and contradictions that you see in the ocean. Well, yeah, I think, and you know this better than I probably, 17 of the world's largest cities are built on the ocean. 4 billion people or so live within, easy reach of the ocean. What it is about the ocean that so attracts people?
Well, I mean, me being armchair psychologist here, I mean, I think throughout time, the ocean has represented and also quite literally served as the sort of metaphor for freedom and escape, and a place where people ventured to get away from governments, other people, landed life, authorities of one form or another, and it was. I think it has always been outlaw. This is not a thing that I've created and recently imposed. I think it was always this extra legal space, not bad or good necessarily, but just sort of a frontier beyond the reach of most norms, and that.
Hello. It attracts, the wealthy who go there for, relaxation, etc. But also attracts the poor for that sense of freedom that you were talking about. And as a result, it attracts, it has an attraction to everyone.
Yeah, and there's also the middle realm, 50 million who simply work out there and maybe aren't attracted to it, but it is an employment.
That's right. There are jobs. There are jobs there for sure.
Yeah, and so there's like that whole kind of. But even with that demographic, I would say there's something oddly addictive to the space and captivating about it. It really captures even that workforce, some of whom experience awful abuses and yet return willingly to the job because it's all they know, and they've kind of become accustomed to that way of life. And that's one of the most mysterious things about it culturally, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting moment because as media, as we know it, evolves and changes, magazines disappear, newspapers disappear. There are these incredible opportunities now for new storytelling ways. I was listening yesterday to Malcolm Gladwell and Jacob Weisberg and Michael Lewis talking about the boom in podcasting, and I think Malcolm went on a riff about how, but it's so much bigger than that. That the podcasts are just a small part of it, and that we're all kind of looking for these opportunities. But yours is, I have to say, incredibly unique. Especially now that you tell me you've got several hundred musicians participating. That's very, very interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm glad you think so. I certainly think so. I mean, I think there are two ways in which it's unusual and still an experiment waiting to be concluded. One is as traditional legacy outlets like the one I used to work for at the New York Times find it harder to finance long-form international narrative investigative style journalism. The economics just don't make sense for that kind of stuff. Coming up with alternate models to fund this is a challenge that anyone who wants to do it has to tackle. And as a funding model, there's some experiment and innovation here in that part of the streaming revenue that's made on the music goes, well, not part of it, any money that we make on it, i.e. that the musician doesn't make, goes into a nonprofit that funds more journalism. So the goal here, partially in scaling this up, is to fund more journalism of this very sort on this very topic or this space.
This next song, says Ian, Will to Survive by D-Day 1, opens with the topic of stowaways. After September 11th, immigration laws were tightened virtually everywhere in the world, and heavier penalties were imposed on ships arriving with people not listed on their official crew or passenger manifests. Nations shifted the responsibility of handling stowaways from government immigration agencies to shipping companies and their insurers. This put new pressure on ship owners, who in turn put it on captains and their crews. If stowaways were discovered on board while a ship was at sea, crews were sometimes ordered to make the problem go away. A practice called rafting was one solution. In May 2011, a Tanzanian named David George Mandaula snuck aboard a 370-foot cargo ship in Cape Town called the Dona Liberta. He hoped to escape Africa and go anyplace else, but he was soon discovered by the crew, who put him on a raft hundreds of miles from shore and cut him loose, leaving him to die. D-Day 1 uses audio from interviews with David, whose weather-worn voice, thick Tanzania accent, and somber tone convey at least as much as the words he offers.
What do you need to survive as a stowaway?
I need to survive because you see, my life is not like same people living. This is the hard living made must change. Because human being not live like this. Because it's part of life, that's why I live like this.
So how many stowaways do you know in Cape Town?
Yeah, it's too much story.
How many? Like 10, 20, 30?
Like 50.
50 stowaways?
Yeah, I'm gonna show you if you go. I'm gonna show some of the people that it's too much brother. It's too much brother.
The series set out to explore that space that is 2/3 of the planet, and in many ways is in many places ungoverned and ungovernable. And more specifically, it set out to broaden the diversity of understanding about the types of illegality that exists out there.
And you see that, and you see that, and you see that, and you see that.
You see everything from intentional dumping to murder to kidnapping to slavery to casting stowaways overboard.
You're listening to the Green Radio Hour with John Bowermaster here on Radio Kingston, WKNY, 1490 on your AM dial, 107.9 FM, streaming live and archived always at radiokingston.org. We've been listening to an interview with Ian Urbina, author of The Outlaw Ocean, and his very extensive and one-of-a-kind music project, also called The Outlaw Ocean. We'll be back after a few words from Radio Kingston.
Hi, I'm Ulster County Executive Pat Ryan. As we've been making our way through the global pandemic, we've found many different ways we can help Ulster County residents. So we've expanded our Ulster County COVID hotline to now include food, housing, employment and business assistance, and mental health support, as well as to help with COVID-19. When you call 845-443-8888, our operators will direct your call so that you can get to the resources you need. If you'd like more information about the services we offer, you can visit our website, covid19.ulstercountyny.gov.
If you haven't already filled it out, the deadline to complete your 2020 census questionnaire is August 14th. It's quick and easy. It's safe, secure, and confidential. Your response helps to direct billions of dollars in federal funds to local communities for schools, roads, and other public services. Results from the 2020 census will be used to determine the number of seats each state has in Congress and your political representation at all levels of government. You can complete your form online, by phone, or by mail. Just go to my2020census.gov.
Welcome back to the Green Radio Hour with John Bowermaster, here today with writer Ian Urbina and his extensive collection of music inspired by his years of reporting on lawlessness on the oceans around the world, on all 5 oceans, or all 1 ocean, depending upon how you see it, and all 7 continents. More from Ian.
My son is 16 years old. He doesn't read, at least yet, the New York Times and New Yorker, places where I write, but he does consume a huge amount of information and news, and it's largely through YouTube and comedy and music. And so the thought here was, well, if we want to reach a different demographic, namely like my son in Washington, D.C. or in Hong Kong or Indonesia, and we also want to reach people in a different way through different platforms, this is partially an experiment at that. Let's commandeer Spotify and turn it into a journalistic platform. Why does it have to just be a music platform? And so the goal was to get big enough that Spotify notices us, and it's like, wow, you guys are doing some interesting things, and you guys have something that we don't have, which is really cool videos and narrative and written content. Do you want some distinct access to our platform in return for producing more music as you're already doing? And that's where I think really we could do some cool things journalistically, and they've given us that sort of access. And so now we're running Outlaw Ocean footage and other written text on the Spotify platform.
And what's the best way for people to go directly to the Outlaw Ocean music stuff?
I think that the website, theoutlawoceanmusic.com, is one way, because people listen to their music through different, Apple Play or Google, and the website can launch you on whichever path. The other option is you just go on Spotify, and if you keyword search my name, then all the music will come up that we've released thus far, connected to my profile. So those are 2 different ways you can get to it.
And you're releasing new music every month, it sounds like.
Yeah, 50 albums every 2 months.
Just say that one more time. 50 albums every 2 months.
Yeah, 50 new albums every 2 months.
But who could have imagined that, 10 years ago?
It's bizarre, right?
Yeah,
it's the digital era of music.
Well, bring me up to speed on what else you're doing with the Outlaw Ocean. I mean, the book is out and gotten great acclaim.
Mm-hmm.
The music project's underway. I know you've got your fingers in a bunch of different film projects. What will we see next?
Well, I mean, none of this is of value, at least to me, unless it's built on the core of the journalism, right? I'm still at root, while I like to dabble in all these things. For me, the whole mission of in leaving the Times and creating the Outlaw Ocean nonprofit was to produce 4 or 5 major stories that are written in their first form and then translated in other forms after that. So, I have a story coming up in NBC News in about 3 weeks that took a year and a half to report and discloses the largest fleet of illegal fishing ships ever discovered. And, that should be some serious human rights things going on there. And all of these stories are always reported offshore, and we went to North and South Korean waters to film and report on that. And then there's this piece coming up in several months, 2 months, I think, in the New Yorker, about fish meal and global aquaculture. So the journalism is the core, and writing, sort of reporting on site, writing long explanatory pieces is step one. And that's what the nonprofit is still doing. And, COVID has obviously put a damper on travel, but we're still getting stuff done.
Yeah. And, I'm going to go through and we'll play a few of the songs from I think we'll probably just grab from your recommended Pandora list just because it's right here. I mean, I can't imagine that you have a favorite, but are there some that you that stick out to you? Like if we had Lin-Manuel on the phone, I'll bet he could give us a highlight from Hamilton.
It's a Sophie's choice, right? You can't ask who. I mean, there is one song by a small artist from Mexico that was part of the very first wave of releases. The artist is named De Osos. Oso is a bear in Spanish. And this guy is a very unknown artist. And I can send you the link, but it's the first track on his album. And the thing I just go back to is it's just hauntingly beautiful in its musicality, but it's also just a genius use of Secretary of State John Kerry's rendering at the UN and recounting of the Lang Long, the shackled Cambodian sea slave that we reported on, and sort of that young man's travails. And it's just John Kerry's recounting of that story, and then the way that this artist sewed it into the music. You don't hear Kerry until 2 minutes in, but then he tells the story and the sort of music crescendos behind him. And I just think that's just amazing. It's like one of my favorites for sure.
Yeah, I see it here. The silence is the core of the lifestyle at sea. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, I look forward to more, Ian. Thank you very much for catching us up. And we'll play a few of these songs.
John, thanks for having me.
Yeah, we'll talk soon. Thank you, Ian.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I thought we'd close out that conversation with Ian Urbina and his massive new Outlaw Ocean music collection with one more song. This is called The New Frontier by Joe Corfield, and this is how Ian describes the song. No other energy company had ever tried to drill for oil as far north in the Arctic, and environmentalists warned that if an oil spill occurred in those icy remote waters, it would be impossible to clean up. But in 2017, a Norwegian oil company decided to proceed anyway, and Greenpeace hoped to stop it. Located in the Barents Sea off the north coast of Russia and Finland, the drilling rig called the Sonja Enabler was even more controversial because it was parked in international waters more than 258 miles north of mainland Norway. This next song by Joe Corfield, called New Frontier, uses this dramatic speech that was given as a team of activists in speedboats breached the drilling rig's security zone. The captain of the Greenpeace ship was a South African guy named Mike Finken, who read an impassioned message across the ship's radio, explaining the purpose of their direct action protest. While he read his speech, a Norwegian Coast Guard cutter boarded the Arctic Sunrise, arrested everyone on board. Attaching a cable to the ship, the Coast Guard then towed the Sunrise and its crew for 2 days back to Tromsø, Norway, where 5 crew members were fined a total of nearly $20,000 and released. You hear part of this speech during this song.
should all be worried when we have NGOs doing their job with governments. Yet that is what exists on the high seas.
We will stand our ground in peaceful protest at the operation that is most dangerous, the drilling for more oil at a time when the Earth can least afford to emit more CO2 and affect climate change.
In closing, here's something Ian wrote in an email. Journalists don't use music enough to access people, and yet musicians are masters at telling stories with their songs. Why should movies be the only things that have soundtracks? Why can't a book have a soundtrack? By pairing two types of creators, a journalist and a musician, around content that is urgent, dramatic, and global, the outcome is music that is tied to something much deeper, a collection of at-sea issues that connect us all. These artists have taken a real leap of faith in lending their creative capabilities to help spread this message, try something new, and support this journalism. Furthermore, they have produced some gorgeous music. Some artists within decided to choose a theme to inspire their EPs, telling a story with a beginning, middle, and end. Others focused on conveying an emotion or feeling without necessarily spelling it out in lyrics. All struck the perfect balance between a vast, open, and free ocean, and a melancholy, dangerous, and limiting space. Across all of the artists participating, there's a global audience of more than 70 million, thanks in part to the geographic diversity of the artists participating. In recruiting artists from around the world, the project conscripted an army of cultural diplomats who are talking, in their own language of music, about the weighty concerns facing this offshore realm and the millions of people who work or depend on it. This disparate audience is one that could never be achieved in a traditional journalistic way, and the revenue that the project takes in on our end goes towards the nonprofit that funds this reporting. This has been the Green Radio Hour with John Bowermaster on WKNY Radio Kingston, 1490 on your AM dial, 107.9 FM, streaming live and archived always at radiokingston.org. See you next week. P.S. This is John back with you. Turns out we've got a little extra time today, so maybe we'll play a couple more songs from the Outlaw Ocean Music Project. You can find it on the website at theoutlawoceanmusic.com. And thanks again to Ian Urbina.
For most of us, the sea is simply a place we fly over, a broad canvas of darker and lighter blues. Though it can seem vast and all-powerful, it is vulnerable and fragile, in part because environmental threats travel far, transcending the arbitrary borders that mapmakers have applied to the oceans over the centuries.
Yeah.
At a time when we know exponentially more about the world around us, we know shockingly little about the sea. Fully half the world's peoples now live within 100 miles of the ocean. Over 56 million people globally work at sea on fishing boats, and another 1.6 million on freighters, tankers, and other types of merchant vessels. And merchant ships haul about 90% of the world's goods. And yet journalism about this realm is a rarity, save for the occasional story about Somali pirates or massive oil spills. It is vulnerable and fragile, in part because environmental threats travel far, transcending the arbitrary borders that mapmakers have applied to the oceans over the centuries.
resource to give and get help in this time of COVID-19 is the Kingston NY Mutual Aid Facebook page. Mutual aid is a way for us as community members and neighbors to come together, 6 feet away or digitally, to support each other. Join the page, create a post stating your need, whether it's help getting groceries if you are immunocompromised, disabled, or a senior, or any other support your situation calls for. And if you have the ability and time to meet any needs you see and can respond to on the page, or if you'd like to offer a specific kind of support you haven't seen requested yet, you can post about that too. That's Kingston NY Mutual Aid on Facebook. Many comments, one community.
The universe began with a sound. Hi, I'm Jaguar Mary X. Join me for Midnight Medicine Journey, now on 3 nights a week. It's a radical space for recreating oneself. It's a ceremony of evolutionary transformation. We're playing music, listening to poetry from the ancestors like Toni Morrison, Lucille Clifton, and James Baldwin. There'll be interviews and guests. That's Midnight Medicine Journey with me, Jaguar Mary X, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday nights from midnight till 2 a.m. Here on Radio Kingston, AM 1490, FM 1079, and anytime at radiokingston.org.
The opinions expressed on this program are those of the speaker or guest and do not necessarily reflect those of the management or staff of Radio Kingston, WKNY, AM 1490, FM 1079, Kingston, New York.
Come and hear a story every Sunday afternoon.